The morning sun cast long shadows across the parking lot as Thomas pulled into the far corner, away from the shiny new cars gleaming under the dealership's banners. He chose this spot on purpose, just another customer coming to browse, nothing special. Thomas smiled to himself as he stepped out of his 10-year-old sedan, a far cry from the luxury vehicles he typically drove. At 42, Thomas had built Summit Motors from nothing into one of the most successful automotive groups in the region. 15 years of hard work, sleepless nights, and risks that sometimes make his stomach turn had paid off. Now he owned 12 dealerships across 3 states, but this location was special, his newest acquisition, purchased just 4 months ago. Thomas adjusted his plain blue polo shirt and brushed a hand over his jeans. No designer labels today, no expensive watch, nothing that would give away who he really was. He'd learned years ago that the best way to understand how his businesses truly operated was to experience them like an ordinary customer would. "Time to see what we're really selling here," he muttered to himself, locking his car and pocketing the keys. The glass doors of the showroom swooshed open, letting out a blast of air-conditioned air. Inside, the space was immaculate, polished floors reflecting the overhead lights, cars arranged in perfect formation, their paintwork gleaming. Thomas took it all in with a critical eye, noting the cleanliness but also the emptiness. Only 2 other customers wandered the floor, both being attentively helped by salespeople. Thomas walked slowly past a midnight blue sports coupe, running his fingers along its smooth surface. From the corner of his eye, he caught a salesperson glancing his way, then quickly turning back to a computer screen. Strange. The man had clearly seen him, but made no move to approach. Moving deeper into the showroom, Thomas stopped to examine a luxury SUV, opening the driver's door to inspect the interior. The new car smell wafted out, leather and plastic and possibility. He sat in the driver's seat, adjusting it, testing the feel of the steering wheel in his hands. Still, no one came to assist him. 15 minutes passed as Thomas wandered from vehicle to vehicle. He noticed something troubling. Whenever he made eye contact with staff members, they would quickly look away, suddenly finding paperwork that needed urgent attention or a phone call that couldn't wait. It was as if he had become invisible. A young woman in a crisp suit finally walked past him, but before Thomas could speak, a well-dressed couple entered the showroom, and she immediately changed direction to greet them with a bright smile. Thomas frowned. This wasn't the experience he wanted for anyone walking into his dealerships, let alone the very people who might not fit the typical wealthy customer image. He'd built his business on the principle that everyone deserved respect and attention, regardless of how they dressed or what car they currently drove. After 20 more minutes of being overlooked, Thomas decided it was time to be more direct. He spotted the floor manager, a tall man with graying temples and an expensive suit, sitting at a desk in the center of the showroom. According to the nameplate, this was Robert, the manager he'd hired based on impressive sales records from his previous position. As Thomas approached the desk, Robert continued typing on his keyboard, not bothering to look up. "Excuse me," Thomas said politely. "I'm interested in the silver luxury sedan by the window." Robert glanced up briefly, his eyes making a quick assessment of Thomas's casual clothes and relaxed demeanor. Something flickered across his face. Dismissal, Thomas realized with a sinking feeling. "That vehicle starts at $85,000, Robert said flatly, already looking back at his computer screen. "Financing options require excellent credit and a substantial down payment." Thomas nodded slowly. "I understand. I'd still like to take a look at the features and possibly test drive it." Robert sighed, the sound heavy with impatience. "Look, we're quite busy today. Perhaps you'd be more comfortable looking at our pre-owned economy models in the lot next door. Jake can help you with those when he's free." Thomas felt a mixture of disappointment and anger rising in his chest. This was exactly the kind of behavior he'd worked so hard to eliminate from his businesses. Here was Robert, judging a potential customer solely on appearance, potentially losing a major sale, and definitely creating a negative experience. Little did Robert know that this ordinary customer signed his paychecks. Thomas decided to wait just a bit longer before revealing himself. He wanted to see just how deep this problem went at his newest dealership. Thomas stood his ground despite Robert's dismissive tone. The showroom lights reflected off the polished cars around them, creating an almost theatrical setting for what was becoming an uncomfortable scene. "I'd really prefer to look at this model," Thomas insisted calmly, gesturing toward the luxury sedan that had caught his eye. "I've been saving up for something special." Robert's eyebrows lifted slightly, doubt written clearly across his face. He glanced down at Thomas's worn sneakers, then back to his computer screen. "Look, buddy, I've been selling cars for nearly 20 years. I know when someone's wasting my time." A young salesman walking by slowed his pace, clearly overhearing the conversation. He looked uncomfortable but continued walking, avoiding eye contact with both men. "I assure you, I'm not wasting anyone's time," Thomas replied, his voice level despite the anger bubbling beneath the surface. "I'm a serious buyer." Robert finally stood up from his desk, his height meant to intimidate as he towered over Thomas. "Listen, our high-end models require proper financing. We can't just let anyone test drive them. These cars cost more than most people make in a year." A couple nearby glanced over, whispering to each other. Thomas noticed how the woman shook her head slightly, disapproval clear on her face. At least someone in the room recognized how inappropriate this treatment was. "I understand the value of these vehicles," Thomas said. "Perhaps I should speak with another salesperson who might be more willing to help me." Robert scoffed, adjusting his expensive tie. "They'll tell you the same thing. Look, I'm trying to save us both some time here. These luxury models aren't for everyone. The maintenance alone would probably be outside your budget." Thomas felt his jaw tighten. In 15 years of building his business, he'd worked hard to create an environment where every customer was treated with respect. He'd fired managers before for exactly this kind of behavior, yet here it was happening in one of his own dealerships. "What exactly makes you think I can't afford this car?" Thomas asked directly, wanting Robert to say the quiet part out loud. The showroom had grown quieter now, with several employees pretending to be busy while clearly listening in. Robert seemed to notice the attention but doubled down rather than backing off. "Experience," he said flatly. "I can tell which customers are browsing above their pay grade. It's nothing personal. The economy models next door are perfectly good cars." A woman in a tailored business suit approached from across the showroom, paperwork in hand. Her name read Patricia. She glanced between the two men, sensing the tension. "Is everything all right over here?" she asked, her eyes lingering on Thomas with a hint of recognition that she couldn't quite place. "I'm handling it," Robert said curtly. "Just explaining our financing requirements to this gentleman." Patricia looked unconvinced. "I can take over if you have other matters to attend to," she offered, clearly trying to defuse the situation. "No need," Robert insisted. "As I was explaining, we have strict protocols about test drives for our premium vehicles. We need proof of income, credit check, valid ID. All of which I can provide," Thomas interrupted. "Though I find it interesting that you didn't ask for any of those things from the couple you were helping earlier." He nodded toward a middle-aged pair being helped by another salesperson, clearly receiving the red carpet treatment despite not looking particularly wealthy themselves. Robert's face flushed. "They're repeat customers." "How do you know I'm not?" Thomas challenged. "Because I remember our high-value clients," Robert replied, the condescension in his voice unmistakable. Patricia shifted uncomfortably beside them. "Sir, perhaps I could show you the features of the sedan while Robert handles some paperwork." She was clearly trying to rescue the situation. Robert shot her a warning look. "I've got this under control." The gentleman was just leaving to check out the pre-owned lot. Thomas didn't move. "Actually, I think I'll stay right here. In fact, I'd like to speak with the owner of this dealership." A cold smile spread across Robert's face. "The owner is rarely on site. You'd need an appointment, and frankly, he wouldn't be interested in this situation." "You seem very certain about what the owner would think," Thomas replied, his voice gaining an edge. "I know exactly what kind of customers we cater to here," Robert said firmly. "And I don't appreciate having my time wasted." Little did he know, the owner was standing right in front of him, and time was indeed running out for Robert's career at Summit Motors. The tension in the showroom was thick enough to cut with a knife. Other customers had begun to notice the uncomfortable exchange between Thomas and Robert, some watching openly while others pretended not to see. "I still want to see that car," Thomas said firmly, pointing to the silver luxury sedan. His patience was wearing thin, but years of business negotiations had taught him to keep his composure even when angry. "And I'd appreciate being treated with basic respect." Robert let out an exaggerated sigh. "Fine. I'll need to see your ID and proof of income before we go any further." He held out his hand expectantly, as if Thomas would immediately produce financial documents from his pocket. "Do you ask all your customers for financial documentation before showing them a vehicle?" Thomas asked, looking pointedly at a well-dressed man across the showroom who was already sitting in the driver's seat of a similar luxury model, keys in hand, without having shown any paperwork. "That's different," Robert said dismissively. "Look, buddy, I'm trying to be patient here, but you're starting to waste everyone's time." A young salesman named Dwayne, who had been hovering nearby pretending to arrange brochures, looked increasingly uncomfortable. He kept glancing between Thomas and Robert, clearly recognizing something was very wrong with how this potential customer was being treated. "Perhaps I should speak with your supervisor," Thomas suggested, his voice calm but firm. Robert laughed, a short barking sound with no humor in it. "I am the supervisor, the floor manager, and I'm telling you that you need to either show me proof you can afford this vehicle or move along to the economy lot." He crossed his arms and stared down at Thomas, using his height advantage in an attempt to intimidate. By now, the entire showroom had gone quiet. A salesperson helping another customer had stopped mid-sentence, her eyes wide as she watched the scene unfold. The customer service representatives at their desks had stopped typing, all pretending to be busy while straining to hear what was happening. Thomas took a deep breath. "Let me understand this correctly. You're refusing to show me a car because you've decided, based solely on my appearance, that I can't afford it." Robert's face reddened slightly. "I'm making a professional judgment based on 20 years of experience in luxury auto sales, nothing personal." "It feels quite personal from where I'm standing," Thomas replied evenly. "Maybe you're just being too sensitive," Robert said with a shrug. "Not everyone is cut out for luxury vehicles. There's no shame in knowing your budget limitations." Patricia, who had been standing nearby, took a step forward. "Robert, maybe I should." "Stay out of this," Robert snapped at her before turning back to Thomas. "Listen, I have actual qualified buyers to attend to. Jay can help you with the pre-owned economy models when he's free." Thomas stood perfectly still, studying Robert's face. "You really have no idea who I am, do you?" "Should I?" Robert scoffed. "Are you some local celebrity I've never heard of?" Before Thomas could answer, the front doors of the dealership swooshed open, and a woman in her early 40s walked in briskly. She wore a tailored pantsuit and carried a leather portfolio. Her confident stride and the way her eyes immediately scanned the showroom marked her as someone in authority. Thomas recognized her immediately, Alexandra, his regional manager who oversaw operations at 5 of his dealerships, including this one. They had met just last week during a corporate strategy meeting. Alexandra spotted Thomas and froze mid-step, her eyes widening in recognition. She quickly composed herself and walked directly toward him, ignoring Robert completely. "Mr. Washington," she exclaimed, extending her hand. "What a surprise to see you here today. I wasn't aware you were planning to visit." Robert's smug expression faltered slightly as he looked between them. "It was an unplanned visit," Thomas replied, shaking her hand. "I wanted to see how things were running on a typical day." "Alexandra, have you met Robert? He's been giving me quite the educational experience about how customers are treated here." The color drained from Robert's face as realization slowly dawned on him. You're Thomas Washington," Thomas finished for him. "CEO and owner of Summit Motors, including this dealership." He turned back to Alexandra. "Robert here was just explaining that I don't look like the type of customer who should be shown the luxury models." Alexandra's professional smile vanished instantly. "He what?" Robert's Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed hard. "There's been a misunderstanding. I was simply following Protocol 4. For judging customers based on their appearance." Thomas interrupted, his voice still remarkably calm. "For treating people differently depending on how they're dressed? Is that the protocol you're referring to?" By now, every employee in the showroom had stopped what they were doing. Some looked horrified, others seemed grimly satisfied that Robert had finally gone too far. A few customers were watching with open interest, including an older couple who had been considering a luxury SUV but now appeared to be having second thoughts. I didn't realize. Robert stammered, his earlier confidence completely evaporated. Clearly, Thomas said, "Let's continue this conversation in your office." "Alexandra, would you join us, please?" As the three of them walked toward the back of the showroom, Thomas could hear the whispers starting behind them. He kept his face expressionless, but inside, his disappointment was immense. This was exactly the kind of discrimination he had worked so hard to eliminate from his business, and somehow it had crept back in when he wasn't looking. The walk to Robert's office felt like the longest 30 seconds of his life. Every employee they passed stared openly, the news spreading through the showroom like wildfire. Thomas Washington, their actual boss, had been treated like an unwelcome nobody by Robert. Robert's office was modest but had the best view in the building. Large windows overlooked the entire showroom, allowing him to monitor his staff. Now those same windows meant everyone could see what was happening inside, though they couldn't hear the conversation. "Please have a seat," Robert said nervously, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. His hands were visibly shaking now. Thomas remained standing. "I think I'll stand. This won't take long." Alexandra closed the door behind them, her face a mask of professional composure, though Thomas could see the anger simmering beneath the surface. She'd been with his company for 8 years and understood Thomas's values better than most. "Mr. Washington, I can explain," Robert began. "I'd like to hear that explanation," Thomas said quietly. His calm tone was more unnerving than if he'd been shouting. "Please tell me what company policy authorized you to treat me, or anyone, that way." Robert loosened his tie slightly. "It wasn't company policy exactly. It's just experience. In this business, you develop an eye for serious buyers." I was trying to save everyone time. "By making assumptions based on how I was dressed?" Thomas asked. "Or was it something else about my appearance that led you to those assumptions?" The implication hung heavy in the air. Robert's eyes darted between Thomas and Alexandra, realizing he was in dangerous territory. "It wasn't about race," he said quickly. "I treat all customers the same." Alexandra cleared her throat. "That's interesting because I've been reviewing customer satisfaction surveys for this location. We've received several complaints about differential treatment in the past 2 months." She pulled out her tablet and swiped through a few screens. "In fact, the data shows a clear pattern of who gets attention and who doesn't." Robert's face flushed red. "Those surveys are unreliable. People complain when they can't afford what they want." Thomas walked slowly around the office, examining the sales awards on the wall. "You know, when I started this company 15 years ago, I was turned away from 3 different dealerships when I went to buy my first decent car. I had the money, a loan approval letter in my pocket, but nobody would take me seriously." He turned to face Robert. "I promised myself that if I ever owned my own dealership, every single person who walked through those doors would be treated with respect. No exceptions." Outside the office, employees had given up pretending not to watch. A small crowd had gathered, whispering among themselves. Patricia stood at the front, her arms crossed, a look of grim satisfaction on her face. "Mr. Washington, please," Robert said, desperation creeping into his voice. "I've been in this industry 20 years. My sales numbers are excellent. You can check." "I have checked," Thomas interrupted. "Your overall numbers are good, but they come entirely from a specific demographic of customers. Meanwhile, you're turning away countless potential buyers based on your judgment." He made air quotes with his fingers. Alexandra set her tablet on the desk, turning it to face Robert. "Here's a breakdown of your sales by customer demographic compared to our other dealerships. Notice anything unusual?" Robert glanced at the screen and swallowed hard. The data was damning. "Look, in sales, you have to prioritize your time," he insisted. "The luxury market is." "The luxury market is for anyone who wants and can afford luxury," Thomas cut in. "My company doesn't prejudge who belongs in that category." A knock at the door interrupted them. Patricia poked her head in. "Sorry to interrupt, but Mr. Washington, there's something you should see." Thomas nodded for her to continue. We've pulled the security footage from today and the past week, she said, her voice steady despite Robert's glare. It shows a clear pattern in how Robert has been treating different customers. Thomas looked at Patricia with new interest. You've been documenting this? She nodded. Several of us have noticed it getting worse over the past few months. We reported it through proper channels, but the reports never made it past Robert, Alexandra finished, understanding dawning on her face. He's been intercepting complaints. Robert stood up abruptly. This is ridiculous. You're all ganging up on me because of one misunderstanding. One misunderstanding? Thomas repeated softly. Let's be clear about what happened today. You saw me, a black man in casual clothes, and decided I didn't belong in your showroom. You refused to show me vehicles that any other customer would have been shown immediately. You spoke to me condescendingly. You suggested I go look at cheaper cars. And when I insisted on being treated fairly, you became hostile. The room fell silent. Even Robert couldn't find words to defend himself. The thing is, Thomas continued, if you treat the owner this way, I can only imagine how you treat everyday customers who don't have my authority. Outside the glass walls of the office, more staff had gathered. Some looked concerned, others seemed relieved, as if something long overdue was finally happening. Mr. Washington, Robert said, his voice quieter now, I've been in this business a long time. The methods I use work. Do they? Thomas asked, picking up the tablet and scrolling through the sales data. Because according to these numbers, you're missing out on a huge potential market. And beyond the business impact, you're violating everything my company stands for. He set the tablet down and looked Robert straight in the eyes. So now I have a decision to make. Thomas let the silence hang in the air for a moment, studying Robert's face. The man's earlier arrogance had completely disappeared, replaced by a nervous sweat that was beginning to form on his brow. Outside the glass office walls, employees continued to gather, watching the drama unfold like a silent movie. Let's talk about Summit Motors' core values, Thomas finally said, his voice measured and calm. Do you know what they are, Robert? Robert shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Of course. Excellence in service, integrity in business, and he struggled to remember the third. And equality in treatment, Thomas finished for him. It's not just some nice words we put on the website. It's the foundation of how we do business. He walked to the window overlooking the showroom floor. Every person who walks through those doors deserves the same level of respect and service. That's non-negotiable. Alexandra opened a folder she'd been carrying. I've been collecting these reports for the past month, waiting for a quarterly review. But today's incident makes it clear we can't wait that long. She laid out several printed sheets on Robert's desk. These are customer complaints specifically mentioning unfair treatment. Notice any patterns. Robert glanced down at the papers but quickly looked away. The pattern was obvious. Nearly all the complaints came from minority customers or those who didn't fit the wealthy image. Those people were just being sensitive, Robert mumbled, but his words lacked conviction. Thomas turned sharply. Those sensitive people are our customers, Robert. They pay our salaries, including yours. More importantly, they're human beings who deserve dignity. He picked up one of the complaint forms. This woman waited 45 minutes while 3 different salespeople helped other customers who arrived after her. This elderly gentleman was told we don't offer financing to people on fixed incomes without anyone even checking his credit. This young couple was steered away from luxury models to economy cars despite specifically stating their budget. Robert's face had gone pale. Those were just misunderstandings. Stop, Thomas said quietly. Just stop with the excuses. He sat down in the chair across from Robert's desk, leaning forward intently. I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I want an honest answer. Do you believe certain types of people don't belong in a luxury car showroom? The office went completely silent. Even Alexandra seemed to hold her breath. Outside, the gathered employees pressed closer to the glass. Robert opened his mouth, closed it, then finally spoke. It's not that simple. In sales, you have to be efficient with your time. You develop an instinct for who's a serious buyer and who's just dreaming. That's not what I asked, Thomas replied. But your answer tells me enough. He stood up again. Show me your sales records for the past 6 months, by customer. Alexandra handed Thomas her tablet with the files already pulled up. Thomas scrolled through them carefully, his expression growing more troubled with each swipe. Robert, out of 126 sales you made in the past 6 months, only 7 were to black customers, only 12 to Hispanic customers, none to anyone under 30. How do you explain that when our customer base in this area is much more diverse? I sell to qualified buyers, Robert insisted. That's my job. Your job, Thomas corrected, is to sell cars to everyone who walks through that door looking to buy one, not just the ones who fit your narrow idea of what a real customer looks like. Thomas walked to the office door and opened it. Patricia stood there with a security guard and another employee holding a laptop. Come in, Thomas said. Show me what you found. The employee with the laptop, her name tag read Liz, opened it and turned the screen toward Thomas. This is footage from last Tuesday. I've queued up 3 different customer interactions with Robert. The first clip showed Robert warmly greeting an older white couple, immediately offering them coffee and taking them to see luxury models. The second showed him barely acknowledging a middle-aged black woman before passing her off to a junior salesperson. The third showed him telling a young South Asian man in casual but expensive clothes that financing might be difficult for someone your age, without even asking about his situation. Thomas watched without comment, his expression growing darker with each clip. When the videos ended, he looked directly at Robert. Want to explain the difference in how you treated these customers? Robert's shoulders slumped. Look, I've been in this business 20 years. Old habits die hard. The industry has always worked this way. Not my industry, Thomas said firmly. Not my company. He turned to the gathered employees. I want to be very clear about something. Summit Motors exists to serve all customers with respect, dignity, and fairness. Anyone who can't or won't uphold that value doesn't belong here. He turned back to Robert. I believe in second chances. I believe people can learn and grow. But I need to know, do you actually see anything wrong with how you've been operating? Robert looked around at the faces watching him, realizing just how isolated he was. His jaw tightened. This is how luxury sales works. Always has been. I'm just being realistic about who buys expensive cars. Thomas nodded slowly, as if Robert had just confirmed something he already knew. Thank you for your honesty, at least. He turned to Alexandra. I think we have enough information to make a decision. The gathered employees held their breath. Everyone knew what was coming next. Thomas took a deep breath, his decision already made. The showroom beyond the glass walls had gone completely still. Even customers browsing cars had picked up on the tension and were watching the drama unfold. Some had their phones out, probably sensing something significant was happening. Robert, Thomas began, his voice calm but firm, I built Summit Motors from nothing 15 years ago. I started with one rundown dealership and a dream of creating something different in this industry. A place where everyone is treated with dignity and respect, regardless of how they look or what they wear. He paused, looking around at the faces pressed against the glass, employees who depended on him for their livelihoods. This isn't just business for me, it's personal. Every time someone is judged, dismissed, or treated poorly because of their appearance, it hurts our entire community. Robert shifted in his chair, his expression hardening. Look, I've made you a lot of money. My numbers speak for themselves. Do they? Thomas asked, pointing to the spreadsheet still visible on Alexandra's tablet. Because what I see is a man who's turning away countless potential customers based on prejudice. How many sales have we lost because people walked in and weren't given a chance? How many people left here feeling less than, feeling unwelcome, feeling disrespected? He walked to the window, looking out at his dealership. Each person who walks through those doors is someone's father, mother, son, daughter. They have dreams, aspirations, and yes, money to spend. They deserve respect, not judgment. Robert rolled his eyes slightly. This is business, not a charity. My job is to sell cars to people who can afford them. And how exactly do you determine who can afford them? Thomas asked, turning back. By the color of their skin. By their age? By what they're wearing? He shook his head. No, Robert, that's not business. That's bias. Alexandra stepped forward, her professional demeanor firmly in place despite the tension. The numbers don't lie. Since Robert took over management 3 months ago, our customer satisfaction scores have dropped 15%. Sales to diverse customers are down nearly 30% compared to our other locations. Thomas nodded. And this is in a neighborhood that's more diverse than most of our other dealerships. It doesn't make sense. Unless someone is actively turning people away. Robert stood up suddenly, his chair rolling backward. This is ridiculous. You're going to lecture me about sales? I've been selling luxury cars since before you owned a single dealership. And that's exactly the problem, Thomas replied calmly. You're stuck in an old way of thinking that doesn't work anymore, and frankly, was never right to begin with. He turned to Patricia and Liz, who were still standing near the door. Thank you both for bringing this to my attention. It couldn't have been easy. Patricia nodded. It wasn't. But we believed in what Summit Motors is supposed to stand for. Thomas turned back to Robert, who now looked more angry than afraid. Robert, I hired you because of your impressive sales record. But I've seen enough today to understand how you achieve those numbers by catering to a narrow slice of potential customers while ignoring or dismissing everyone else. He gestured toward the door. The security footage, the sales data, the customer complaints, and my own personal experience today all point to the same conclusion. You are deliberately creating a hostile environment for customers who don't fit your idea of who belongs in a luxury dealership. Robert scoffed. You're making a mistake. My clients will follow me wherever I go. Some might, Thomas acknowledged. But for every client you keep, we've lost dozens of others who never got the chance to become customers in the first place. He straightened his shoulders. Robert, your employment with Summit Motors is terminated, effective immediately. The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Outside the office, several employees exchanged glances, some nodding in agreement, others looking shocked. You can't be serious, Robert said, his voice rising. Over one misunderstanding. This wasn't one misunderstanding, Thomas replied firmly. This was a pattern of behavior that goes against everything we stand for as a company. Alexandra will handle the paperwork. You'll receive 2 weeks severance pay, which is more than generous considering the circumstances. He gestured to the security guard who had been standing quietly by the door. Frank will escort you to clean out your desk. Your company access cards, keys, and credentials need to be turned in before you leave the building. Robert's face had turned an alarming shade of red. You'll regret this. I'll take my clients with me to Wilson Motors across town. Thomas remained unmoved. That's your right. But while you're packing, I want you to think about something. Every person you dismissed, every customer you made feel unwelcome, they weren't just lost sales. They were people who deserved better. He turned to Alexandra. Please make sure all of Robert's accounts are transferred properly and that his access to our systems is removed immediately. The security guard stepped forward. Sir, if you'll come with me. Robert looked around the room, searching for any alley, any support, but found none. His shoulders finally slumped in defeat. This is a mistake, he muttered, but there was less conviction in his voice now. As Robert was led out of the office, employees quickly stepped aside, creating a path through the showroom. Some looked at the floor, avoiding eye contact, while others watched openly, relief evident on their faces. Thomas stood in the doorway of the office, watching as Robert was escorted out. The message was clear to everyone in the building. At Summit Motors, treating people with dignity wasn't optional, it was essential. The showroom remained silent as the front door closed behind Robert and the security guard. For a moment, nobody moved or spoke. Then, as if a spell had been broken, a quiet murmur spread through the gathered employees. Thomas turned to face them, suddenly aware that everyone was watching him, waiting for what would come next. Could I have everyone's attention, please? Thomas called out, his voice carrying across the showroom. Salespeople, office staff, and even the mechanics who had wandered in from the service department all gathered closer. A few customers lingered as well, sensing they were witnessing something important. Thomas moved to the center of the showroom, standing beside a gleaming black luxury sedan. I want to apologize to all of you, he began, surprising many with his words. As the owner of this company, what happens here is ultimately my responsibility. I failed you by not being more present, by not seeing what was happening under my own roof. He looked around at the faces watching him, faces of every color, age, and background. This was the diverse team he'd always envisioned when building his company. For those who don't know me, I'm Thomas Washington. I founded Summit Motors 15 years ago with one simple belief: that everyone deserves to be treated with respect and dignity regardless of what they look like or how they dress. He gestured toward the luxury vehicles surrounding them. These cars aren't just for one type of person. They're for anyone who wants them and can afford them, period. Patricia stepped forward. Mr. Washington, many of us tried to report what was happening, but the complaints never went anywhere. Robert made sure of that. Thomas nodded grimly. That stops today. Alexandra will be implementing a new reporting system that bypasses local management and goes directly to our regional office. He turned to Alexandra, who stood nearby. And I want a complete review of all customer interactions from the past 3 months. Anyone who was turned away or treated poorly deserves a personal apology and a second chance to experience what Summit Motors is really about. A young salesman raised his hand hesitantly. Sir, Robert always told us to focus on customers who looked like they had money. He said it was just being efficient. And how's that working out for our sales numbers? Thomas asked, looking around. Alexandra just showed me that this location's numbers are down 15% compared to our other dealerships. That's not efficiency, that's lost business. He walked over to the wall where framed mission statements and awards hung. Our first core value is printed right here. We treat every customer as a valued guest in our home. That's not just a slogan, it's how we do business. It's how we succeed. Thomas turned back to the gathered employees. I started this company because I know what it feels like to be judged, to be dismissed, to be told you don't belong. 15 years ago, I walked into 3 different dealerships with a loan approval letter in my pocket, ready to buy my first decent car. Not one salesperson would take me seriously because of how I looked. He paused, letting his words sink in. I promised myself that if I ever owned my own dealership, nobody would ever feel that way in my showroom. Today, I learned that I've been failing that promise. A middle-aged woman who had been browsing cars stepped forward. I've been watching all this, and I have to say, it's refreshing. I was ignored at 2 other dealerships before coming here today. Thomas turned to her with genuine concern. I'm sorry to hear that, and I'd like to personally make sure that doesn't happen here. He looked around at his sales team. Who can help this customer right now? 3 hands shot up immediately, including Patricia's. Thomas smiled. Patricia, would you mind? And afterward, I'd like to speak with you about taking on more responsibility here. As Patricia led the customer toward the cars she was interested in, Thomas addressed the remaining staff. Starting tomorrow, we're implementing a new training program focusing on inclusive customer service. It's something we already do at other locations, but clearly we need a refresher here. He looked around at the showroom, at the beautiful cars and the people who sold them. I want this to be the best dealership in the city, not just in sales numbers, but in how people feel when they walk through those doors. Everyone who comes in should leave feeling respected, whether they buy a car or not. Alexandra stepped forward with her tablet. I've already scheduled a team from corporate to come in tomorrow. We'll get things back on track. Thomas nodded gratefully. Thank you. He turned back to the staff. I'll be spending much more time here over the next few weeks. My door is always open if anyone has concerns. As the impromptu meeting broke up, employees returned to their stations with a new energy. Thomas noticed something remarkable. People were standing taller, smiling more genuinely as they approached customers. The atmosphere had already begun to change. One of the mechanics approached Thomas hesitantly. Sir, I just wanted to say thank you. Robert made this place uncomfortable for a lot of us. It feels like we can breathe again. Thomas shook the man's hand. Thank you for sticking it out. Things are going to be different from now on. Over the next few weeks, Summit Motors underwent a transformation. With Patricia promoted to floor manager and new training in place, customer satisfaction scores began to climb. Sales followed soon after, proving what Thomas had always believed. Treating people with respect wasn't just the right thing to do, it was good business. 6 months later, the dealership had become the top performer in the entire Summit Motors Group. The story of the black CEO who was denied service at his own dealership spread throughout the industry, becoming a powerful lesson about prejudice and its consequences. For Thomas, the most satisfying change was seeing the diverse range of customers now happily driving away in luxury vehicles, customers who might have been ignored or dismissed under the old regime. Each smiling face represented not just a sale, but a small victory against the bias that had once threatened to undermine everything he had built.